Welcome to Thriller Vault. Tonight I have the harrowing true story of former POW Jessica Lynch. Here is Saving Private Lynch. Jessica Lynch was born in Palestine, West Virginia in 1983. Like many people in Palestine, Jessica's family wasn't rich. Her parents couldn't afford to send her to college, so the Lynch family met with an Army recruiter in the summer of 2000, hoping to use the GI Bill to go to college. The recruiter warned of the possibility of war, but this was before 9/11, so Jessica thought it was unlikely that she'd go to war. In September of 2001, Lynch went to basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. She later completed AIT, or Advanced Individual Training, as a unit supply specialist in the Quartermaster Corps at Fort Lee, Virginia. She was deployed to Iraq in 2003. On March 23, 2003, Private Jessica Lynch traveled north on Highway 8, an Iraqi freeway. She was part of a convoy from the Army's 507 Maintenance Company. The surrounding desert was flat and dark before dawn. Including Jessica, there were 33 soldiers and 18 vehicles in the convoy. They were headed to support a Patriot anti-missile battery. These soldiers were mostly cooks, mechanics, and supply clerks. The vehicles in the convoy included a few Humvees escorting heavy trucks towing trailers. Captain King led the convoy in a Humvee. At approximately 6 a.m., Captain King was exhausted, and he missed a turn on their assigned directions. The turn would have kept them on Highway 8, which would have taken them around Nasiriyah. Instead, they drove directly into the city on a 4-lane boulevard. The barren desert gave way to palm groves and greenery. A mile after they missed their turn, they passed Iraqi T-55 tanks along the roadside, but the convoy didn't notice them in the dark. A half-mile further, they crossed a bridge over the Euphrates River. Once they crossed the river, they were in the heart of Nazaria, a heavily populated city of about 500,000 people that included 5,000 Iraqi soldiers and 800 Fedayeen militia fighters. Nazaria was a military city. The citizens had been anticipating an invasion by the Americans. They were ready with tanks, artillery, and soldiers positioned in strategic places to repel the invasion. But when Private Lynch's convoy motored into the city, the Iraqis were stunned. They expected infantry soldiers and tanks. They didn't expect a lightly armored convoy driven by men and women. The Iraqis held their fire and watched in disbelief as the convoy drove deeper into enemy territory. Shortly after crossing the Euphrates River, they passed an Iraqi military checkpoint with armed soldiers. The soldiers smiled and waved. Despite this, the convoy motored deeper into Nasiriyah. They continued north for another 3 miles without any issues. They crossed a bridge over the Saddam Canal and drove another mile past the northern edge of Nasiriyah. At this point, Captain King stopped the convoy and consulted his GPS. He realized that they were way off course. He figured out that they'd made a wrong turn about an hour earlier. He determined that the convoy would need to reverse course and retrace their route back to the intersection where they'd gotten off course. King ordered the convoy to turn around, and he told his soldiers to ready their weapons. On the return trip through Nasiriyah, the Iraqis were no longer stunned in disbelief, and they started to shoot at the trucks. Some of the U.S. soldiers panicked. Many of their weapons jammed, since they had not been properly maintained in the dusty desert. Captain King got lost on the unfamiliar streets under a hail of gunfire. One truck was disabled by enemy gunfire. 2 other trucks got stuck in the soft sand. Sergeant Donald Walters, who had been riding in the disabled truck, was accidentally left behind. He was taken prisoner by the Fedayeen and killed. News of the mostly defenseless and confused American convoy spread throughout the city, and the Fedayeen militia fighters circled like sharks with blood in the water. Under heavy attack, the convoy split. Vehicles were separated in the confusion and swirling dust. 2 American soldiers were shot. Private Jessica Lynch and 4 other soldiers were in a Humvee towing a trailer near the rear of the scattered convoy. In front of Lynch's Humvee was a 5-ton truck towing a flatbed trailer driven by Specialist Edgar Hernandez. Lynch's Humvee and Hernandez's 5-ton truck drove south down a street that Marines would name Ambush Alley. They were cut off from the rest of the convoy. As they sped down Ambush Alley, the Fedayeen shot at them with AK-47s and rocket-propelled grenades, or RPGs. Despite the aggressive attack, they made it through Ambush Alley. At around 7:20 a.m., they sped back over the bridge and the Euphrates River. They were nearly home free when Specialist Hernandez swerved on the shoulder to avoid hitting an Iraqi dump truck that had been parked there to block the convoy from escaping. When Hernandez swerved, his trailer jackknifed, and Lynch's Humvee slammed into the trailer at 50 miles per hour. Private Lynch was in one of the rear seats. Her best friend, Private Lori Paestawa, was driving. Private Lynch and Private Paestawa were knocked unconscious in the crash. They were taken by the Iraqis to the Taikar Military Hospital, where Private Paestawa died from her injuries, becoming the first female U.S. soldier to die in the Iraq War, and the first Native American woman to die in U.S. military combat. The other 3 Humvee passengers died in the crash or shortly after it. A few hours later, an Iraqi military ambulance took Lynch to Saddam Hussein General Hospital, which was a civilian hospital nearby. In total, 11 soldiers from the 507 Maintenance Company died, and 7 were captured. As the sun rose that morning, on March 23, 2003, hundreds of U.S. Marines readied themselves to invade Nasiriyah. When they neared the bridge over the Euphrates that the convoy had crossed twice, Iraqi forces fired with artillery, AK-47s, and mortars. In the middle of this battle, an Army Humvee sped toward the Marines, the vehicle full of bullet holes and riding on flaming tires. The Humvee slammed on the brakes as it reached the Marines, and Captain Troy King jumped out, appearing extremely stressed. He yelled about his convoy and the losses they'd suffered. Major Bill Peebles, the commander of the tank column leading the Marines into Nasiriyah, was confused. No Army units were supposed to precede the Marines. The Marines were supposed to be the tip of the spear, so to speak. Captain King finally explained that most of his soldiers remained behind, some dead, some pinned down by enemy fire. Major Peebles led his tanks off to look for survivors. The Marine tanks found several U.S. trucks that were on fire and shot full of bullet holes. They found 10 Army soldiers hiding in a ditch still taking fire. The Marines rescued the soldiers and turned around their tanks. The tank column left Nasiriyah to deliver the wounded soldiers from the maintenance convoy to a secure location for medical attention. Within days after the battle in Nasiriyah, the U.S. military knew from several Iraqi sources that Private Jessica Lynch was being held at Saddam Hussein General Hospital. The husband of the nurse caring for Lynch, a lawyer named Mohammed O'Day al-Rahif, told Marines manning a checkpoint outside of the city that he had spoken with Lynch at her bedside. The Marines asked Mohammed to gather more information. He went back twice and gave the Marines detailed maps of the hospital building and Lynch's exact location in the hospital. There was military presence at the civilian hospital initially, but Iraqi fighters were largely gone by the end of March. The staff at the hospital treated Private Lynch well. According to one of the doctors caring for Lynch, hospital staff had donated their own blood to her. On March 30th, this doctor put Private Lynch in an ambulance and instructed the driver to drop her off at the nearest American military checkpoint. But Marines shot at the ambulance, causing it and Private Lynch to return to the hospital. Ironically, Private Lynch's rescue was already set for March 31st. CENTCOM and the Coalition of the Willing had suffered several setbacks on March 23rd and in the days after. This could potentially destroy the narrative set by the Bush administration that the Iraq War would result in a quick and easy victory. In a separate incident on March 23rd, the U.S. Army accidentally shot down a British Royal Air Force bomber. At night on March 24th, an Abrams tank fell off a bridge into the Euphrates River, drowning the crew inside. On March 26th, another friendly fire incident between 2 Marine units resulted in 37 wounded. On March 27th, a U.S. A-10 Warthog attacked a British convoy near Basra, killing 1 British soldier and injuring 3 others. After this week filled with disasters, CENTCOM was desperate for good news. Jessica Lynch was exactly what they needed. The perfect piece of PR propaganda. On March 30th, Pat Tillman, an infantryman from the 2nd Ranger Battalion and a former NFL football player, wrote in his journal, "I do believe this to be a big public relations stunt. I wish everyone in trouble to be rescued, but sending this many folks in for a single low-ranking soldier screams of a media blitz. In any case, I'm glad to be able to do my part, and I hope we bring her home safe. 5 other soldiers from Lynch's convoy were being held captive at the time, but little was being done to find and rescue them, certainly not as much as Jessica Lynch. Using Muhammad's information, the U.S. military planned an operation to rescue Jessica Lynch on March 31st. On the day, the mission was postponed for 24 hours. Congressman Henry Waxman later alleged that this delay was to secure a special operations video crew so the rescue could be broadcast to the world. The rescue team encountered gunfire as they approached the hospital in 6 helicopters, but the gunfire was light and no helicopters or soldiers were hit. At midnight, the special ops team breached the hospital, took Lynch from her bed and rushed her out of the hospital on a stretcher to a waiting Black Hawk helicopter. They did not encounter any resistance inside the hospital. Within 3 hours, a 5-minute video of the rescue was edited for dramatic effect and given to the media. Jessica Lynch's story was published on the front page of the Washington Post on April 3rd with the headline, "She was fighting to the death." The story quoted a U.S. official stating that Private Lynch fought fiercely and shot several enemy soldiers, firing her weapon until she ran out of ammunition. She continued firing after she sustained several gunshot wounds and watched several American soldiers die around her. She was fighting to the death. She did not want to be taken alive. The official also stated that Lynch was stabbed when Iraqi forces closed in on her position, and that the initial intelligence reports said she was stabbed to death. The Washington Post quoted an anonymous military officer who was briefed on the operation. He said, "There was shooting going in, there was some shooting going out, it was not intensive. There was no shooting in the hospital, but it was hairy because no one knew what to expect." The officer also said that the special operations team found what looked like a torture chamber in the basement with batteries and metal prods. With the Washington Post article and the dramatic video, Jessica Lynch's rescue was all over the news for weeks. Further details of Jessica Lynch's story provided by military public affairs officers created compelling and exciting media. According to these public affairs officers, Lynch had been tortured and raped in addition to being shot and stabbed before finally being rescued from her evil captors by special ops soldiers. The rescue of Private Lynch spawned 600 stories across every form of media, including a quickly written book that hit #1 on the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list, and also a made-for-TV movie titled Saving Jessica Lynch. Over the following years, it was discovered that much of these details were embellished or were complete fiction. In truth, Lynch's rifle had jammed, so she never fired a single round. Her injuries were in fact serious and life-threatening, but they were the result of the accident with Specialist Hernandez's trailer. Private Lynch was never shot, stabbed, tortured, or raped. After she was transferred to Saddam Hussein Hospital, her captors treated her with good care, and the special ops team met little resistance when rescuing her. Jessica Lynch never lied about this. This manufactured story came from anonymous military and government sources. In fact, the story likely came from the very top of the U.S. government. The man who had arranged for the media to interview the anonymous sources was Jim Wilkinson. He was the director of strategic communications for General Tommy Franks, the commander of all U.S. military in Iraq and Afghanistan. Jim Wilkinson was President George W. Bush's man at the U.S. Central Command headquarters in Qatar, carefully shaping the propaganda handed to the press in regard to the war. It was Jim Wilkinson who gave the propaganda to the Washington Post. While being interviewed by Diane Sawyer, Jessica Lynch said, "They use me to symbolize all this stuff. It's wrong. I don't know why they filmed the rescue mission or why they say these things." She also said, "I did not shoot. Not around. Nothing. I went down, praying to my knees. And that's the last I remember." The media was criticized of being biased in their intense coverage of Private Lynch when compared to the scant coverage given to her fellow female soldiers, Shoshana Johnson and Lori Paestewa. All three suffered through the same ambush in Nazariya, Iraq, with Paestewa being killed, while both Shoshana Johnson and Jessica Lynch were injured and taken prisoner. Media critics pointed out the racial disparity of Private Lynch being a young blonde woman, while Johnson is a black woman and Paestewa was a Native American. Shoshana Johnson, a cook with the 507th Maintenance Company, suffered bullet wounds to both of her ankles. She was held prisoner in Iraq for 22 days with 5 others from her unit. They were held captive 12 days longer than Jessica Lynch. They were freed in a rescue mission conducted by the U.S. Marines. Specialist Shoshana Johnson, who is the first black female prisoner of war in military history, received a Bronze Star for her actions in Iraq. To her credit, Jessica Lynch didn't support the media's glorification of her actions. In a congressional hearing, she stated,
"However, I'm still confused as to why they chose to lie and try to make me a legend when the real heroes of my fellow soldiers that day were legendary. People like Lori Piestewa and First Sergeant Dowdy, who picked up fellow soldiers in harm's way, or people like Patrick Miller or Sergeant Donald Walters, who actually did fight until the very end. The bottom line is the American people are capable of determining their own ideals for heroes, and they don't need to be told elaborate lies."
On January 19, 2007, Jessica Lynch gave birth to her daughter, Dakota Ann, named after her fallen friend, Lori Ann Piestewa, the first Native American woman killed on foreign soil in an American war. Jessica eventually did what she set out to do when she joined the U.S. Army. She attended West Virginia University at Parkersburg on a full scholarship because of her military service. She graduated with a degree in elementary education in 2011 after completing her student-teacher training at the same elementary school she had attended as a child in West Virginia. As of 2022, Jessica Lynch was an elementary school teacher in West Virginia. Thank you so much for watching and listening to Thriller Vault. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe. I hope to see you all next week for another thriller story.